So some of the products that you're probably most familiar with or that you'll use probably in your day-to-day job, and I'm going to go in the order that yeah, you'll probably end up using these, is Ortho Photos. Most you'll recognize that as kind of the backdrop in the GIS data or software or in the quick data loader. Ortho Photos, and I'll go into them a bit more here, but Ortho Photos are basically created from a series of overlapping photos. And my job as a photogrammetrist is to basically take those aerial images and create a map-accurate ortho photo. Another product that you may or may not use, but I'll go over it a little bit here, is a digital surface model, or DSM. This is actually captured from the stereo imagery, and I don't know if you can see, but I got kind of a representation of it up here. But a good way to think of it is it's kind of like poor man's first return LiDAR. Another product that we offer here and is available, but unfortunately you have to come down here to Olympia, is stereo viewing. And I'll go over that a bit, but that's basically this monitor here behind me. So starting with ortho photos, why do we need to make an ortho photo? Basically, I got a couple examples. One of the problems with just taking an aerial photo and mapping from it is what we call displacement. And I know these probably won't show up that well, but these are basically two photos of the same area. We're up on the Canadian border here. And you'll notice this photo where the border is more in the center of the photo. The border is nice and straight, which it is in real life. Then the next photo, though, to the north, though, and you probably can't see this very well, but now the border appears to wander like that. And what's due to that is the displacement from the center of the photograph. And in this case, we got a lot of mountainous terrain. So imagine if you actually brought this photo into your GIS software, traced that border, and then loaded it into your handheld GPS, you'd wander all over the place. So that's a good example of why you can't just use a regular photo to map from. Another example where that comes into play is I got a picture here. This is 3 photos of the same timber stand, but if you do the acreage calculation, they're going to be different based on which photo you use. In this case, it's 77 acres, 70 acres, and 62 acres. So we always joke, buy the timber with this photo and sell it with this photo. So basically what we're trying to do with an ortho photo is get rid of that displacement so that you can bring it in your GIS system and map from it. So I'll start with going over the different cameras that are used to collect these aerial images. There's basically 2 types of cameras. There's a frame-based camera, which is more kind of what you're used to, say, on your iPhone or a traditional camera, and where it just takes overlapping photos as the plane flies along. There's another camera that creates ortho photos that we use here in DNR. It's called a push broom sensor, and it's basically like they mounted a scanner upside down on a plane that scans at different angles as the plane flies along, and a combination of those angles gives you the stereo overlap. So the first, oh, and sorry, the overlap, traditionally what we try to shoot for is 60% in the flight and 40% with adjacent flights. So that ensures that we get proper stereo coverage in the whole project area. The first part, so to make an ortho photo, the process is called aerial triangulation, or AT. And the first step of the process is, you'll notice on these aerial photos here, they have these marks at the corners. And those are called fiducial marks. And one of the first jobs that I have is I have to go through and measure each one of these. And what that will give me later on, this will become more apparent, but what that gives me is what we know as plate coordinates, or basically a coordinate system in this photo. It's not related to anything on the ground, it's just a measurement related to these fiducials. So say in a 1,000 photo project, I gotta go through and measure 1,000 fiducials. So it's quite time consuming, and you really need to be accurate at that step. The next part, after I have all my fiducials measured, is I have to perform a relative adjustment, as they call it. And what I like to think about it is that's where we basically tie the photos together. Mind you, they're overlapping, so we have the same features, and we use tie points, as they call it, but I like to think of them as almost like if you took staples and stapled this in all the common areas. The staples hold the photos together, but allow it to flex a little bit. And basically, if you can imagine, we have to tie all these photos together. So imagine several thousand photos tied together in a whole sheet. And when they get tied together, they're nice and tight. Basically, there's no parallax when you view them. They look nice and in focus. That's what we call the relative adjustment. So the photos fit together. You know, basically, I've cleared the parallax, as they call it. Problem is, it doesn't really know where it is in the world. So the next step is what we call the absolute orientation, where we introduce control points. Now, typically when we're planning for a flight, we'll go out and find features that we can see from the air, or have surveyors go out and put down targets that we can see from the air, and capture coordinates from those. Basically, I like to think of those, if these were the staples, the tie points, the control points are kind of like 16 penny nails. They really nail it down. Unfortunately, and I'll go into this a bit here later too, because we have a lot of historical photos. A lot of times my control is whatever I can find, and in this case 1972, that's still there in 2017. So that can be kind of a time-consuming process as well. But once I've tied the photos together, brought in the control, basically we do a bundle adjustment, as they call it, or basically make sure all the photos fit to each other and to the control. And if that's acceptable, basically we're done with the aerial triangulation process at that point. And we're able to view it in the stereo monitor, and I'll go into that a bit more. But the problem is now we got to make the ortho for the flat computer screen. So how we do that is we have what we call stereo controlled imagery. So basically each photo knows where it is, X, Y, Z, in the world. And then we introduce a digital elevational model, or a DEM. And the preferred DEM would be captured from LiDAR, say bare earth LiDAR. What I'm going for is an accurate mathematical representation of the ground. When you make an ortho, you have two choices. You can either make the ground fit where it fits, or the elevated structures or tops of trees, buildings, etc. fit. Here at DNR, we prefer the roads to be in the right place, so we tend to use a bare earth DEM. Where we don't have LiDAR, because if any of you are familiar with LiDAR, you know we're missing that in a lot of the state, especially in the mountainous areas. We use the USGS 10-meter DEM, which is basically a digital version of those contour lines you guys are used to seeing on the quad maps. So the software takes the DEM and the stereo-controlled imagery, and basically it creates a common plane or a standard elevation throughout the project. And any feature in the stereo that's above that plane, say the tops of the mountains, gets downsampled, and anything that's below that plane, say valleys, gets upsampled. And what you end up with is a constant scale across your photograph. So now it's map accurate. Now you could actually, trace the road in GIS, load it into your handheld GPS, and it would follow the road. But what you end up with, each photo, you only get what we call a sweet spot, which is about an inch in from the edge. So we just get a bunch of mini ortho tiles for each photo. Then my next job is I have to stitch all those ortho tiles together, and because of different light that was available when the photos were taken, processing, yada yada, I have to go through and kind of balance the color. Otherwise you get kind of a stripe effect when you view the whole mosaic. So we basically stitch them together, color balance them, and then we chop that mosaic of ortho photos into tiles, which then I make into a file geodatabase for the GIS people to consume. So basically that's the process from taking the raw photos and going all the way to the data layers that you're used to seeing in the quick data loader. So that's kind of how ortho photos are made. There are some drawbacks to ortho photos, of course. One of the being is it's a flat image, so you can't tell tree height, building height, slope, some of the stuff like that. Another problem is remember when I talked about using the digital elevational model to create an ortho photo, if I go and say fly it again next year, and I use a little different digital elevational model, which is pretty common, especially if you have different vendors flying, or say I didn't tie those photos together in the exact same way I did before, the orthos will appear to be shifted slightly from each other. So that's why we always tell the users to never really chase the orthos. You'll notice if you get, even from the same vendor, successive years of orthos covering the same spot, you'll notice they're shifted a little. And that doesn't necessarily mean one of the orthos is inaccurate. It more just means that they use a different digital elevational model in there. Another thing that you'll see when you're looking at orthos is what we call a smear, where it literally looks like someone smeared the image. That's caused where the digital elevational model is so poor, it doesn't actually line up where it should in the real world, I guess is a good way to put it. So you'll see that a lot. Usually in professional orthophoto projects, those are usually eliminated because we use a fairly good digital elevational model. But if any one of you has used drone software, you'll notice that after your drone's done flying, you load it up to the cloud, it does some processing and spits back your ortho, and a lot of times you'll get smears. And the problem with that is the drone software actually try to create that digital elevational model using the stereo imagery. And it doesn't always do a very good job. So say in shadows or wind move the branches around or something like that, you'll get a smear in the product. So kind of one of the things to keep your eye out for when you're looking at orthos. Basically, if you see a smear, you kind of know you got some bad data on your hands. Another thing you'll look for as you're going through orthos is, remember I told you these were a bunch of sweet spots that have been stitched together. Well, when I join two sweet spots, I don't just use a square grid. It creates what we call a seam line, which is basically like a wandering line where it tries to stay, like, say, in the trees and kind of hide it from your human eye so that it looks like one photo. But you'll notice if you're going across trees, you'll notice kind of all the trees are leaning one way, then you'll hit this kind of a blurred line and they'll all flip back over the other way. You found the mosaic line or the seam line then at that point. So that's some of the things that you see in orthos. Kind of just to be aware of. There are some limitations to them, but the main reason we use them and the reason they're the most popular product is they're used quite extensively in GIS. So another product that we make, and this is, we've historically made these for quite a while, but usually just for resource or photogrammetry units, internal use. But one of the things I've been creating lately is the digital surface model. LiDAR is a very popular product, and with our foresters. The problem with LiDAR is it's expensive. So what do you do out in the areas where you don't have LiDAR, or say you want to get updated LiDAR? Because, boy, once it's flown once, it's going to be a while before it's flown again due to cost. So when I have the stereo imagery, the photogrammetric software that I use has the ability to go along, and being how it knows where each photo's at, X, Y, and Z, it can calculate pixel by pixel the X, Y, and Z for that pixel. So what I can basically make is a top surface grid of, now mind you, it rides on tops of the trees or buildings, but it's kind of like first return LiDAR for much more economical too, price-wise. So it's not perfect, it's not as accurate as first return LiDAR, but it's great in areas where we don't have really anything. Another benefit is where we have flown LiDAR and we got good bare earth, as we get successive flight years, we can redo the top surface and pick up change detection. Are the trees grown? Did they get cut down? Is there an apartment building there? Stuff like that. So what I do now, if you've used our quick data loader at all, you'll notice some of our, we have these projects in there called the NAPE. There's NAPE 2006, 2009, 2011, 13, and 15. That basically cover the entire state. We like those projects. You'll notice everything else is kind of a hodgepodge. And what we do here in photogrammetry is we actually take the stereo that's used to create those ortho photos for the entire state and go across it tile by tile and create a top surface model. And that's actually what I kind of have up on the screen here. And I don't know how well this shows up, but this is just one of the tiles. And see, it spits out basically a point cloud. So this is just kind of like first return LiDAR. You can see the trees sticking up here, the clear cut over here. So this product is very popular with our inventory program. As well, and I encourage you, if you can think of any uses on your day-to-day job, to always contact me if you'd like a copy of the data. Unfortunately, the output data is quite large, so I don't really have that on the network, but I can gladly supply you any data that you need. Another benefit of this is it can use every pixel in the imagery. So you'll notice most of our what we call high accuracy LiDAR is a 3-foot post spacing. So basically, every grid is 3 feet by 3 feet, every grid cell. In this case, the imagery used for the NAPE came out to about 14 inches. So each grid cell in this digital surface modeling is actually 14 inches as opposed to 3 feet. So it's a much higher resolution too, which is helps more for our inventory folks to be able to pick out the individual trees, the tree shape. Because if you can imagine taking a tree and cubing it up into 3 foot by 3 foot cubes, you lose a lot of the definition there. So. Another thing, unfortunately though, it takes quite a bit of time to build it. I have other machines here in the room with me, and the computers are full of windows grinding away, and it takes about 9 months to crawl across the state and create that digital surface model. So not a quick product to make, but much cheaper than LiDAR, plus it gives me one continuous coverage in one season. So we kind of like that. One of the drawbacks, of course, with digital surface model, it's not as good as LiDAR. It's not actually a cloud, although it looks like it. It's just on the top surface. There's no points underneath points. So it doesn't quite give you the canopy structure that you could get from, say, a LiDAR cloud. But like I said, it's great where we don't have anything else, basically. Let's see. Another thing, Limitations to it is, like I said, it goes by pixel, but one of the problems it has is when it hits shadowed areas or areas that are blacked out in the imagery, it tends to dive down and cause a kind of an underground spike, so you're not as accurate there. Another thing, water, it's completely useless on water. It basically sees the waves or, it just gets confused. Water looks terrible in the digital surface model. Another thing that affects it is wind. So as you remember, they're two overlapping photos. Well, if the wind blows the tree branch between this photo and this photo, it's going to cause it to move in the imagery. So I won't get as good a digital surface model in that area. Unfortunately, I can't really control for the wind, so we take what we can get. Another problem is the algorithm that goes through and basically ties these points all together has a tendency to smooth the elevated features. So say buildings kind of get a rounding edges. We had a problem too with some of the trees kind of becoming more round than they are. We have tried different strategy files to see if we can eliminate that, but it kind of still is built into this system. So it's kind of the drawbacks of digital surface models, but like I said, they're great where we don't have any LiDAR. Let's see, the other product that unfortunately you usually have to come in here to the photogrammetry unit here to actually use this, but if you remember when I was talking about the process we used to create Ortho Photos, we end up with a bunch of overlapping images that are referenced together. So the real reason we make orthos is no one has these fancy stereo monitors, but if you happen to have the fancy stereo monitors, it's much better to view the images in stereo. And I'll kind of go over that in a minute why. And kind of explain just what these monitors are. So I'm sure if there's any old timers watching this, you might be used to these contact prints, take them out in the field and having to view them under a pocket scope, stereo pocket scope. And this was a great way to see the terrain, allows you to see the stereo effect in the field. Problem is you can't really measure from it. It's just kind of a neat way to view it, kind of get an idea of the lay of the land. So what you're kind of looking at here is a modern stereoscope. So what we have here in the middle, and of course you're not going to get this effect because we're viewing it on a 2D camera, but this is a piece of silvered glass, and you simply wear a pair of glasses. These are just clip-ons, but they're just like the glasses that they use in the 3D movies. They're polarized in a circular fashion, and each lens is polarized opposite to itself. And basically what this does is when you're wearing a pair of these and you look through this piece of silvered glass, your left eye views this top monitor. These are just basically two computer monitors at an angle to each other, and your right eye will view the bottom monitor. And basically your brain puts those two images together and you get the stereo effect. So like I said, it's just like kind of the mirror scope here, and if I've done my job right, they're in focus when they come together. The only difference to this is there's actually a cursor, and we call it the floating point, because using this odd-shaped mouse that I use here, I can move it in X, Y, like a traditional computer screen cursor, but I also have what we call the thumb wheel here, this wheel that I move on my thumb. And that actually moves the cursor towards me and away from me as I'm sitting here using the unit. And what that allows me to do is also measure height, because not only, it's almost the easiest way is like kind of lifting the cursor off the screen. You get kind of that effect. Like I said, it's real hard to capture with the video camera there, but if anyone's ever in Olympia, wants to come in for a tour, it looks much better in real life. But what that allows me to do is as that cursor moves through there, it knows where it is X, Y, and Z in real coordinates. So say I wanted to get the slope of a mountain, I put my cursor up on the top of the mountain, then I put my cursor on the bottom and I calculate the slope that way. I can also get tree height, all kinds of measurements that I can't take using a traditional flat ortho photo. Unfortunately, you need the software and the stereo monitor to view it, but we use it quite a bit here for special mapping projects, change detection, stuff like that. Another thing that the stereo allows us to do is historical research. I'll go into this a bit here at the end, but we have at our disposal quite a large collection of historic aerial imagery. And what I can do is actually bring in different years of imagery in the stereo model, and say I got 1972 on the left and 2017 on the right, and I'll actually have the cursor in the same spot in the 2 years. And this allows us to see, say, where was the river back in 72, where was the road, change detection. Another thing, historical research, basically what was there in 1972. And another thing, because I'm working in 3D, if there is some change, and we use this quite a bit in landslides, I can calculate, say there was a disturbance in the soil, a landslide. Not only can I give you the extent of the landslide, like you could off the ortho, basically draw a polygon around it, but I can also give you the volume of earth that was displaced. And that's used quite a bit for landslides. Basically, I can tell you what the mountain was shaped like before and after and calculate the difference and kind of where did the soil go. We use that a lot for trespass too. If someone comes in and harvests from DNR land, say gravel pit, something like that, we can go in and calculate how much gravel was taken in cubic yards versus just an extent. One of the drawbacks, of course, of stereo is you need the monitor to view it. The monitor's kind of expensive. Also, the software that drives this is not the most user-friendly in the world. So that's kind of why we have them here in Olympia and not out in every region. But like I said, always feel free if you're in the Olympia area, you know, and you just want to check it out. Ideally, you know, the cost has gone down. Who knows, maybe in years down the road, we could start getting more of these out in the regions. Ideally would be my goal. But unfortunately, there's quite a learning curve on the software, plus the expense of the hardware. I mean, this mouse alone is quite expensive because they don't sell too many of them, as you can imagine. So that's kind of Ortho Photos, digital surface model, and stereo viewing. Those are the three products that you'll probably deal with most from remote sensing. I'm not really going to touch on LiDAR. I mainly deal with aerial imagery, so I'm not a LiDAR expert. I do use LiDAR a lot. I'm familiar with it, but geology kind of runs our LiDAR program right now. And if you have any LiDAR related questions, because they all kind of tie in, they can help you out on that too. So those are the three products that we kind of make, kind of the limitations to them, kind of how we make them. Another thing that we have here in photogrammetry is we also have a historical aerial photo archive. And what we have is over 1.5 million exposures, basically 9x9 exposures on film negatives, and this is the actual film can that the negatives are stored in. And we got several hundred of these cans in the back room there. Unfortunately, none of them are scanned. All of them are in analog format at this point. We go back pretty reliably to say the late 60s forward, covering most areas. It's kind of hit or miss though. We use that quite a bit on historical research. The agency uses it a lot. The AG's office uses it a lot. And we also sell the photos to the public. So say your neighbor comes and cuts your tree down, you might be able to get the photo taken before the tree was cut down to kind of show what you had there. That's one of the resources that's available to DNR employees. Kind of going, in fact, I even got a piece of the film here to kind of show you. So this is what the actual film looks like. You'll see it's 9-inch by 9-inch negatives, very high resolution. We basically flew this historically at two different scales, our low altitude as we call it, which is 1 to 12,000 scale, which basically makes each one of these 9x9 contact prints cover a square mile or a section. Our other product that we typically made was high altitude, which is 1 to 63/360 scale, which basically one photo then covers a township. So the 1 to 12s, they're obviously going to be much higher resolution, get a lot more detail out of them. The high altitude stuff is more good for roads, large features. You know, you're not going to see like a fence post or something like that in there. So we tried to fly the state on kind of a cycle. So we got several, usually your area is probably covered by several years of photography. We have basically, there's the film, and then we also do have quite a library of contact prints. So if you are, these used to be very popular with foresters out in the field. They take them out in the field. Real reason we make these is you can touch these. We obviously don't want to touch the film as much as we can, especially because this is basically an archived product at this point. But you know, we always have the contact prints available if you just want to come in and have a quick look and see what, you know, what was there. Say you're working on a timber sale or something, you just kind of want to see what was there at a specific time. And kind of the easiest way for you to go about it, because obviously probably not everyone here works here in the Natural Resources Building here in Olympia, is we do have an email. It's rms@dnr.wa.gov. And you just go ahead and send that email, and Tony Alds, my coworker, actually answers the email there. And all Tony basically needs from you is the legal description, township range section. We don't need anything finer than that because, like I said, our best resolution photo covers the whole section. So basically, if you just give us a section you need, And typically what we do then is we can research, see what photo or what years of photography cover your area, what scales cover your area, and kind of send you back a list, and we can go from there. And say 72 is the perfect year for you. You got different options then. We can just take one of these contact prints, slap it on a flatbed scanner, scan it, and drop it on the network, or basically email it to you so you can look at it back at your desk. If it's a more involved project that involves map, because once again, these are just kind of good to look at. I know people do take these into ArcMap and kind of try to geo-reference them, but I don't really advise it because they're not a very good resolution. But if this involves, say, a project where you need some mapping done from it, a special project or something like that, we actually have film scanners back there that will scan this film to get a very high resolution product that we can use in the stereo software to create an ortho photo like the process I went through before. So typically though, for most users, the process is just send Tony an email with your legal description, get back a year of photos and scales, choose the one you want, and then usually Tony will scan these and send them to you, or place them on the network and email them to you. Usually on the network's easier just due to file size. So just always know that resource is out there, especially if you're working on something where maybe the historical information might help you along. If we don't have any imagery that covers it, we might know of other sources that do. There are some external sources that maintain a film archive as well. So basically, if you have any aerial photo questions, always feel free to give us a call. At the end here, I'll give you my contact name and number and all that, and you can always look me up in the global as well. So never hesitate to give us any questions there. Let's see. Just make sure I covered everything on my little cheat sheet here, but let's see, I covered the products. Another thing I wanted to just touch base on, because it's getting real popular, is drone imagery. And the good news about drones is, from my standpoint, it's really nothing new. Basically, they took a smaller camera and put it on a smaller plane, or gyrocopter, whatever you want to call it. So the aerial triangulation process that I went through earlier is still done to create the ortho photo that you view. The difference is, remember where I talked about the tie points and the control points? The real reason I have to do that is because when everything's said and done with one of these AT projects, what I'm really trying to figure out is where was this exact pic, or where was the camera when it took this picture? And I need to know 6 parameters for that. The XYZ, that's pretty self-explanatory, or the omega phi kappa, which is basically how the plane was tilted when it took the exposure. Now, with our older projects, we don't know any of that at the beginning. So by tying them together, introducing control, and then by referencing back to those photo coordinates, remember I told you about measuring the fiducials, that's how it calculates the XYZ omega phi kappa. Now on a drone, or say a modern flight, there's an airborne GPS unit in the drone or in the plane, so that will give you the XYZ, roughly, of the photo. And then for the omega phi kappa, they have what they call an inertia measurement unit, or an IMU. And basically that same thing, it detects how the camera was oriented when it snapped the photo. So with the drone software, the reason why you can just set your drone up, it flies, takes pictures, you load all the data to the cloud, and then it just magically makes an ortho, is it already kind of knows the XYZ omega phi kappa. I mean, pretty close. Mind you that drones zoom along or the plane, so the airborne GPS isn't perfect. And the IMU units, a very high quality IMU unit is very expensive, so most drones have kind of a lower quality IMU unit. So what the software basically does, because the photos are pretty darn close, is it performs basically, it makes its own tie points, kind of like I went through that part, and kind of tightens up the photos, basically, kind of stitches them together. Now for control, it just uses the airborne GPS, which is why, another reason why I brought up never chase orthos, because even if you fly the same area several times with a drone, you'll notice your ortho shift a bit. And that's just because airborne GPS isn't that accurate. Now if you want to really tighten it down, you can put out your own control. I'm not very familiar with the drone software, so I don't know if it allows you to import control points as well, and how exactly you go about measuring them, but that would tighten down your solution and give you a more accurate product. Unfortunately, though, one of the drawbacks to a drone is the camera doesn't cover very much of the ground when it takes the photo. So you end up with a lot of photos to cover not that large of an area. And with control, basically, you don't want to span too many photos before your control is basically just gets too weak. One of the advantages of a professional mapping camera is to cover, you know, say a town or a section, square mile. I only need 3 photos. Where I do that with a drone, I probably need 1,000 photos. So where in traditional photogrammetry, I only need 1 or 2 control points to accurately control, say a 1 to 12 flight, where a drone to accurately, and I've seen this a lot, they need many control points. So keep that in mind if you're going for a very accurate product. It might just be cheaper to fly it the old-fashioned way with 3 photos versus, you know, thousands of photos loosely tied together. So that's one thing I see a lot in some of the drone projects. So there's also some drawbacks to the drones, the cameras. One of the problems you're going to run into here, and especially in the forestry field, which isn't covered much in GIS because most people doing mapping are going to be covering urban environments, is that when we have elevated structures, trees, a short focal length, which is the distance to the actual, well, in an older camera, it'd be the actual film to the lens. In a modern camera, it's the lens to the CCD or the charge coupling device. But the distance in between there affects how basically how well you can see in between the trees. You want a longer distance as possible. And the good way to think about that is if you're looking straight down on a bunch of matchsticks pointing up at you. If you mash your face down, you can see in between a couple of the matchsticks, but the rest of them are going to look like they're leaned away. Where if you can back your eyes out, you can basically see in between more matchsticks. So when we used to fly these projects, we preferred up to a 12-inch focal length, which is a very long focal length. And that allowed us basically all the way around in here in the photo, you could actually see in between the trees. You weren't actually looking at the sides of them. Now, most digital cameras will have very short focal lengths. And drones, I mean, we're talking millimeters of focal length. So you'll notice if you ever can look at one raw photo taken from the drone, right in the middle, the trees or whatever seem to point straight at you. But as soon as you get just a little ways off, they appear to lean out to the side. You get that effect. So that's all due to the focal length. And to beat that, the way the drones kind of get around it is they basically do a high overlap. Where if you have a long focal length, you don't have to overlap as much, which saves you a lot of processing time plus the amount of photos that you need. But you'll notice with drones, they have a lot of overlap to kind of defeat that short focal length. You get, easiest way, you get kind of a fisheye effect to it, where everything's kind of bent away from you. Another real-world example of that is your iPhone or the camera on your cell phone is a very, very short focal length. So step back from a door sometime, and you'll notice in the screen before you snap the picture, the door appears to curve. Well, you know that's not real. In real life, it's straight up and down. Hopefully it is. So that gives you an effect of the focal length. So in resource photogrammetry or aerial photos, you're always trying to fight that because of course, you're looking at elevated structures. Now, if you're in an urban environment, you're trying to find the manhole covers or something on the flat pavement, so it's not as big a deal. Another thing that the focal length does is it exaggerates vertical. In the stereo specifically, which a lot of the higher-end mapping is usually done in the stereo versus on an ortho. But a long focal length tends to make, the world is actually incredibly flat from the air. So we want to exaggerate the vertical a little, but the long focal length tends to make everything more flat looking in the stereo model. Where a short focal length would make, like, say, a city curb or sidewalk curb look like it's 5 feet tall. And that actually helps you when you're mapping because it's easier to see. But like I said, it's a pain when you're trying to look in between the elevated structures like trees. So you'll notice a lot of times, like I said, as you're using an ortho, you'll notice you're looking at the sides of the trees a lot. And that's what that effect is from. Basically, they had a short focal length and they took the picture of elevated structures. So we like a long focal length, but of course, modern digital cameras tend to go with a short focal length. So once again, though, digital cameras, especially for mapping, are fairly new, at least in my career. When I first started, we were still using film for this. So hopefully as time goes on, they'll get a longer focal length and help you foresters out. But one of the things you'll notice when you're looking at Ortho Photos, a lot of your trees appear to be bent over on their sides. So, and you'll see that a lot in drone imagery too, or at least I have. So So that's kind of a quick overview of a drone. Also know too, if you yourself are ever messing around with drones, out taking pictures, you're not quite getting the results you thought you would, always feel free to let me know in case you want to come in and try using this software. This software is made to basically aero triangulate everything from your iPhone to old 30mm camera and everything in between. So who knows, we might be able to suss something out of the imagery that we weren't able to get before. So just know that option's there. And also, if you have any other questions ever about aerial imagery or remote sensing at all, always feel free to shoot me an email or give me a phone call. We always pride ourselves, if we don't know the answer, we'll chase down hopefully someone who does. And we also like doing special projects too. So if you got anything you think could be fun or at least useful to you, especially with the historical imagery, it's kind of easy going forward. The modern imagery, it comes out, we get it right in the quick data loader for you guys. But we also have all this old historic imagery. One of the things we are trying to do, I was like, get people excited, although it's a very long-term project, is that we are in the process, we've just hired a gentleman to actually scan the film of all this old stuff, get it into my soft copy, as they call this software, and create Ortho Photos. So basically you would have an Ortho photo in the quick data loader from 1972. Unfortunately, it's going to take a very, very long time. We have a lot of imagery. It takes a long time to scan. We're looking at best case scenario, maybe 12 years before all this stuff gets scanned, and that's just scanning the imagery, that's not actually making the orthos. So hopefully not everyone's retired by the time I'm done with that, but just know we are working to actually get all that into a digital format because, of course, people don't really use many contact prints anymore. So we would like to get all those into Ortho Photos. And another benefit is when I have them in stereo, when I do the AT process, not only will I have an ortho photo, I'll also make a digital surface model, but say 1972, so that could be handy for all kinds of work groups around here. And so digital surface model, ortho, and also we'll have the stereo here in case anyone ever needs to view it. So kind of a long-term project, but we are trying to get those digital. That's why I would say if you got a particular area that you need some mapping done for, let us know. We'll kind of bump that in the queue. We're always basically here to assist you guys, especially when it comes to historical research. So, like I said, even if you don't know quite if we can help you out, always feel free to ask us. So I don't know how much more I have to really cover, and I don't know if I can take questions here. I don't know if that's possible, but oh, it is. Oh, okay. So, and I'm not quite sure if many people have tuned in, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them now. Hearing none. Okay, well, once again, my name is Caleb Maki. My email is caleb.maki, which is C-A-L-E-B for Caleb.Maki, which is M-A-K-I, at dnr.wa.gov. You can always shoot me an email there. Also, my phone number is 3... Oh.
We got a question.
Got a question.
What does Google Earth do that is different from your project?
Really nothing. Google Earth is basically the kind of like the ortho photos that I just talked about creating. That's really just a big ortho photo is what Google Earth. Google Earth actually has photogrammetrists on staff. For a long time, Google was basically would acquire through buying or partnering in Ortho Photos, but now they have their own flying programs. They actually go out, fly, take their own pictures, do the aero triangulation process, and create Ortho Photos. So there really is no difference. What you see in the quick data loader is an Ortho Photo, just like what you see on Google Earth. The difference is Google Earth doesn't give me their Ortho Photos for free. Another drawback that we personally find here, because one of our jobs is doing a lot of historical research, is that it's kind of hard to get metadata for what's on Google Earth. Specifically, I don't know if you noticed, but here I have the actual date of the imagery in the upper left, and that gets really critical, especially in lawsuits or something like that. Where in Google Earth, it's just my past experience, it's been extremely difficult for me to try to pin down what was the source of the imagery. I mean, I know they list the year, but we've even found that's wrong sometimes. Basically the metadata behind it. So another thing is using Google Earth in a GIS system. I know it's kind of hard to just cut out the whole ortho and bring it right into ArcMap. Another thing, Google Earth, just for file size and speed performance, I've noticed the compression algorithms they use look a bit rough, you know, and I don't blame them. They're trying to take an enormous amount of data and serve it over the web, but really there is no difference. It's just that I work for DNR, not Google Earth. So, does anyone else have any? Okay, so I was going to tell you my phone number. Once again, my name is Caleb Maki, and my phone number is 360-902-1280. I'm also, like I said, in the global. I work in the photogrammetry unit, they call us here. It was historically called Resource Mapping Section, so if anyone's been around, they might know it as that. We're on the 3rd floor here in the Natural Resource Building in Olympia. I highly advise anyone who's ever in the area to come on by. We'll give you the tour, kind of show you, you know, you'll be able to put on the glasses, check out your house, you know, kind of that. They are the same exact glasses that are used in the 3D movies. Don't ask me how I know that. And like I said, if you ever just want to come by for a tour, or you got some historical research you want to do, if you want to see what we have that covers it, because unfortunately when we do the research, it's not as easy as just going back there and grabbing the photo. I did bring, like I said, one of my biggest problems in my job here is everything's analog. I don't really have much in digital. So when we actually do the research for the photo, and I'm sure you probably can't see this very good, but this is basically just a map of the southwest part of Washington with a bunch of dots on it with numbers. And I have to literally say you need the photo from this year. I have to go pull this piece of paper, count up the dots, see which one I am. Then I have to walk over into the other room, grab the box that's referenced to this that has the contact print in to make sure, because these dots are not always accurate. Make sure that my photo actually covers the area you're looking for. Then I got to go pull the can of film, which is referenced to a book about that thick, of course, not in digital format. Unroll the film, scan the film, and then we have the image. So, like I said, it's quite a time-consuming process. That's why we kind of do the thing where you just email us a township range section. We do the research and kind of spit back what we got. But if you are ever in here and you want to come in, and or if you're actually in the NRB and you know, you find that you use aerial photos a lot, we'll gladly train you how to read these, because it's not that hard. It's just time-consuming. And then you can come on down any old time. And like I said, we got a whole research room. It's all laid out, got plenty of table space for you. And you can go through and grab your photos. We got a nice flatbed scanner here, you know, if you want to do some scans. Or most of the time, people just want to look at the photo and see, was the road there, was the gate there, that kind of stuff. So, like I said, feel free anytime. We you know, it gives me an excuse to actually look at the photos instead of looking at the ones and zeros, which I'm usually doing half the time. So, like I said, doors always open. So,
Is there any technology that will allow stereo on a tablet in the field?
yes, there is actually. So there's two different types of ways to view the stereo. There's passive and active, as they call it. What we have here is called a passive system. And what this does is, because one monitor has one image, the other monitor has the other image, all I have is just a regular pair of sunglasses. I mean, they just look like a regular pair of sunglasses. Basically, I got two monitors here, and just this piece of silver glass is splitting it. That's what's giving me the stereo effect. The reason we prefer that is, one, I'm going to be looking at this for 8 hours, so I like it. It's just like a pair of sunglasses. It's comfortable. It's easy on my eyes. Plus, I can have 4 or 5 people sitting here and looking at it. Now, the other option out there is what they call, this is passive. The other option out there is what they call active. And what that does is basically you get a pair of glasses, although they're pretty thick. And you might have seen, if you've seen any of the 3D TVs, like say in Sears or something like that, they usually have a demo unit out there. And it's basically a big chunky pair of glasses that has a wire that basically plugs into your laptop. And what those do, and the reason we don't like them is, one, they're kind of uncomfortable to wear all day long. But I mean, they're great for field work. What they do is actually they flicker your screen on and off. And they're polarized as well, but what it will do is, and it flickers so fast that your brain puts it together, but basically it lets your left eye see the left image on the screen, then it flicks to the right image on the screen and allows your right eye to see it, and it just flicks back and forth. But it does it many thousand times per second. So to you, it doesn't look like it's flickering, but you see the stereo effect. The drawbacks to it is, one, they're uncomfortable to wear, especially if you're doing what we call compiling, which is, say in the stereo, I want to trace a bunch of roads. You know, basically you're going to be sitting there and looking at it. It's just more uncomfortable to use those. Only 1 or 2 users can usually see it. But yes, there is technology. And in fact, if you go to a lot of the trade shows for this type of software, they usually have them hooked up. And they're not that expensive too. Alienware is a brand I'm familiar with, but you know, just $300-400. So the stereo viewing isn't that hard. The hard part is the software that allows you to view the stereo is usually expensive because it's hard to get just stereo viewing software that doesn't come with all the bells and whistles to do the aerial triangulation process. But there are some cheaper viewers, but cheaper, I mean several $1,000s is cheaper. And another thing is using the stereo imagery. So you can't just take an ortho photo and pull it into your fancy 3D laptop and it looks like stereo. You have to actually have both images and they need to be georeferenced, or they know their XYZ omega phi kappa. We're spoiled here, being a photogrammetrist. I have terabytes and terabytes of stereo imagery. Most users have no access to the stereo imagery. We mentioned the difference between Google Earth. Google Earth is only the ortho. There's no way you're going to get the stereo from Google. So you can call, and I've tried, they won't release the stereo. They might not even have it, because most of the time when people are doing this, their only product they're requesting is the ortho photo. So one of the drawbacks of stereo viewing, and hopefully, who knows, down the road, more and more GIS people are aware that this is where orthos come from. This isn't a new technology. It's been around since about World War II. That there's always, just keep in mind, any ortho you've ever looked at comes from stereo. So there's always stereo out there, whether or not it's on the vendor shelf somewhere, I don't know. But that's usually one of the biggest problems with viewing stereo is you need an access to a lot of stereo imagery. So now, say if we do get a region or a group here at DNR that gets really jazzed on it, they want to buy a stereo viewing tablet and pay for the software. Good news is we can give them all the stereo imagery they can handle. But the problem is, like I said, usually the software costs a lot of money. So when I first started here, there was no way the laptops could keep up with the flickering or the refresh rate on the screens, but that's got much better. So that would be your cheapest route to go if you want to view stereo. Now when I was researching this, I did run across quite a few articles online of people building their own stereo viewing, because really this is just two monitors and a piece of silver glass, nothing too fancy, building their own stereo viewers for video games. So I know there's a lot of hacks out there, you know, if you're ever bored and want to build your own, I know there's ways to do it. But like I said, what I've always ran into is the software. The expense of the software is usually the biggest drawback. Any other questions there?
No.
Sorry, I'm having Mark read me the questions. So like I said, though, if anyone thinks of anything, always feel free to email me or give me a phone call. You know, especially for the historical research end of things, you know, as you go through, you know, if you ever just want to know what the heck was there in 1984 or whatever, hopefully we can get close enough to what you need. And, you know, basically we can have it to you fairly quick, especially if you just want a photo to view. Now, if you want an ortho photo, basically that you can bring to GIS and map from, that's usually quite a bit more detailed and time consuming. And unfortunately, there's only one Caleb. I wish there was about 10 more of me here and we would already have this done. But you know, that's always an option. But unfortunately, I'm usually quite buried under work, so I can't make any promises there. But who knows, you might be able to bend my supervisor's arm. So if there's ever any mapping project you can think of too, always feel free to get a hold of us.